Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
It's Dr. Mike Patterson, your host of the Mission First People Always podcast, where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and how to build a great team. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Angela Sadler Williamson. Angela's 2020 Emmy-nominated documentary film, My Life with Rosie, was recently acquired by PBS. It's about the activism of her cousin, Rosa Parks, and has won numerous Best Documentary titles at film festivals across the country. Angela's companion book, it's an international bestseller, My Life with Rosie, A Bond Between Cousins, was named Best Children's Book About Black History by Mothering Magazine. And I've got a copy. It will probably find its way to one of my granddaughters here in a little bit, but it's a great, well-written, well-illustrated book. Angela's also an award-winning broadcaster and the host of her own show on KLCS, the PBS station here in Los Angeles, Everybody with Angela Williamson, where she emphasizes diversity in education, the arts, and people. And she graciously had me on as a guest in her show. That's where we met. We connected. Where she's returning the favor to me. She's also an associate professor at Rio Hondo College in Whittier, California, where she teaches communication. Angela, welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast.
It is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You know, I've always enjoyed learning about leadership from historical figures, partly because I think we learn more from observation, observing leaders in action, than from theories and ideas in textbooks. And of course, there are some really important people that get relatively little attention in textbooks. So we need to make an extra effort to see them from different perspectives. You've looked very carefully at a major figure in the history of the civil rights movement in this country, Rosa Parks, and you have a special relationship with Rosa Parks. So tell us a little bit about your relationship with Miss Parks and why you wanted to tell her story in a new and perhaps more intimate way.
Again, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. And I think it's so important when we talk about leaders to talk about leaders that were actually behind the scenes, but because of one action, they became just the face of an entire movement. And that's really who Rosa Parks was. I mean, she was part of the NAACP for many years, but she did a lot of things behind the scenes, things that people never knew that she did. And when I started this journey to tell her story, I wanted to share that part of her story because a lot of times when we see leaders, we only see what's in front of us, what we see them, maybe we see them in interviews and we respect those leaders like a Dr. Martin Luther King, but we don't understand behind these strong leaders are people behind the scenes that help them move through these times of change. And in part of the civil rights movement, it was a time of change. And I wanted to tell that story, but it didn't start out with me telling that story that way. I had actually met her about a month before I married her first cousin. We've tried to do the math there. I would have to say maybe he's a third time removed. So first cousin, third time removed from Rosa Parks. And I met her at a family bridal shower. And it was actually part of the family's gift to me as it coming into the family. And they had told me, I'll be honest with you, I didn't believe them. They said, oh yes, cousin Rosie. And at first when they were saying her name, I kept asking, who is this cousin Rosie? And then they looked at me like I was, straight like Rosa Parks. I'm like, oh my God, Rosa Parks. But they told me, yes, she'll come. She always comes to all the families, big occasions, weddings, bridal showers, etc. But I never, in my mind, ever thought that I would have a Rosa Parks at my bridal shower. And indeed, she did come. So that was the first time I met her. She was much older. I mean, at least in her 70s, getting close to 80s at this point. So she was pretty much just a presence. But what a presence she was. I mean, when she walked in the room, everybody's just in awe. And all she at this point was doing, she wasn't doing a lot of speaking, but it was just a smile behind her, that when she smiled at you, you just felt that you were in the presence of someone so great. But she didn't act that way. She was like part of the family. And it was really interesting because I don't remember a lot of things from that bridal shower, but I remember thinking, oh my goodness, the mother of the civil rights movement is playing bridal shower games. I mean, it's something you don't think about, but that's just who she was with the Williamson family. She was just a cousin. I mean, a very famous cousin, but she was a cousin. And so when I met her, that was just probably one of the most amazing events in my life. But then when she came to the wedding, and we had a Rosa Parks at our wedding, and there's this I call it iconic picture from our wedding where the entire bridal party stops and we're supposed to keep walking into the venue. And Jeff and I, Jeff's the husband, we turn around, we're like, where's the bridal party? Well, they're stopped and they're looking up. And they're looking up at Rosa Parks and she's just waving. I mean, this woman she stopped the entire, bridal party moving through the next phase. And that's just who she was. But, I knew she was something special. I was hearing these amazing stories about her, stories I never learned in the history books. But in 2015, when my father-in-law passed away, and then all of his sisters, I just kept talking to them, and two of those sisters ended up staying with us. And that was, one of them was Aunt Carolyn. And I started hearing these stories again, but I started hearing them like with a different type of ear. And a lot of times, this is so important. And I talk about this when it comes to listening. Sometimes we listen to things and they're great stories like what I did. But then at one point we start to listen to hear, and we start hearing things that really spur us into action. And that's what Aunt Carolyn did for me in 2015. She started telling me these stories that I realized that if I didn't start capturing these stories now, that they would be lost forever. And that's when I decided to talk. I discussed it with my husband and said, I just finished my doctorate. I was looking for something to do. I missed video production. And I said, you think it'd be okay to do a documentary on Rosa Parks? And he's like, absolutely. I mean, he knew I needed to do it. That's a whole different story and a part of my life. But I really emotionally needed to look into this woman and get what her leadership style was, and learn not only from Rosa Parks, but I learned more about Rosa Parks through the eyes of Aunt Carolyn. And so that's when that journey started. And I realized that I could share this story with a bigger audience, and did that by first premiering my documentary at the Culver City Film Festival. But it wasn't supposed to start at the film festival. I just wanted it to get into higher education. I wanted it to get into high schools and maybe even junior high school students to watch it. But everybody who was working on the documentary said, Angela, this thing needs to be in film festivals. So I just listened, and that was one of the best choices I made. And the reason that I could follow that advice is because I've been working on the documentary, and I had learned that when you listen to really hear what's being said, that it's the best thing that you could ever do, especially when it comes from very strong leaders, and not just from Rosa Parks per se, but because Rosa Parks spent her time with Aunt Carolyn at a very young age. Aunt Carolyn became that leader too. And Aunt Carolyn is really, she embodies anybody out there today. Aunt Carolyn embodies who truly was Rosa Parks.
What a great story, and how fantastic is it that one of the major historical figures of an entire movement of the 20th century is at your wedding. Incredible. You know, I always say that one of the primary roles of any leader is to bring out the best in the people around them, to impact others in a positive way so they can be something better. They can fulfill their potential. How do you think, and you've really dug into Rosa Parks' life, how do you think Rosa Parks did that with, maybe it's your Aunt Carolyn, maybe it's other people more broadly? How did Rosa Parks make the people around her better?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that is such a great question. You know, I think it was just how Rosa Parks walked with dignity, and she had this certain, I want to say, she had a certain drive and a certain zeal to make sure that everyone, depending on your ethnicity, your race, your gender, was treated with respect. And she believed that so much within herself that she attracted people with that. And when Rosa Parks saw that you had that within yourself, she took her time to pour into you that her philosophy. And how I was able to really see this is Aunt Carolyn is the middle child, and they're unfortunately we've lost another aunt recently. So now there's 3 of them left, but you know, what was 5 children? And Rosa Parks spent so much time with Aunt Carolyn. She must have saw very early on, when Aunt Carolyn was literally like 10 years old, early on, that she can instill those values into her. So whenever cousin Rosie saw that, she poured into it. But another thing too is that cousin Rosie firmly believed that in order to change the prejudice that we had in America and the discrimination that we had in America, that you needed to pour into that next generation. And she did that. I mean, she did that with Aunt Carolyn. She did it with a lot of other young people, but she did it because she is responsible for starting the NAACP Youth Council. I know for sure in Alabama, I haven't been able to see if she's the one that really started it all over, but I am going to make that assumption and say that she did. But because she poured into so many young people, young activists came to her. I mean, there was this photo that I saw, and actually my very first episode on Everybody with Angela Williamson, we did it to pay honor to John Lewis. And the reason that I did that was there's a photo of a very, very young John Lewis and a Rosa Parks.
Wow.
I mean, Rosa Parks didn't just say, you know, we need to stop discrimination. We need to work on our prejudice. No, she worked that into her bones, and she embodied that every day of her life. And she wasn't a person that said, I'm going to take this with me. No, she was a person, when she saw that in any young person, she was there for them. And so I think that's why her story, a lot of times when you tell her story is a few sentences. But when I told her story, I wanted to not only just tell her story, but I wanted to show people, because of what she did, how she actually had a ripple effect on so many people's lives, including all the women I focused on in that documentary who were doing these phenomenal things. It all comes because of that spark that Rosa Parks had.
And that willingness to make an investment in those around her.
Yeah.
We think of leaders oftentimes as being the people in the front, the people who are making the speeches, the people who are leading the marches, taking the action, casting the vision. But I sense that maybe Rosa Parks, her demeanor, her temperament was softer and maybe more quiet, and she seems to be a humble person. Tell us a little bit about what you learned about her, and you interacted with her firsthand, her demeanor and the way she interacted with people, and in her quietness. If my assumption is right here, how did she make you feel? How did that impact you? Was it just her essence and the strength of her character that shined through, and you just felt there was something there? Just tell us about the way she did her work of investing in others and teaching, and investing in people like John Lewis and your aunt and your relatives and all those people. Just what was her approach?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest misconceptions about her is how she used, because they say she's very quiet, but she was soft-spoken. And a lot of times when you look at our leaders, especially when they're making those speeches, they are not soft-spoken. They are a force of nature, and there's a loudness to them that grabs your attention. But Rosa Parks had a whole different approach. She was like fearless in a way, if I had to put it that way. But when she talked to you, there was a firmness behind it, where you knew that she could command a room, but she didn't have to speak loudly to do it. And I think that was like her superhero power, was that people use that as a quiet strength, but what she used it as a way to gather people's attention. So you had to really hear what she was saying. And think about that, Dr. Mike, how powerful is that? When you can walk into a room and you don't have to raise your voice, but you are being heard. And you're being heard to a point that people take what you're giving to them, taking the life lessons. And that's what great leaders do. They leave us these life lessons, and people take those life lessons and they start using those life lessons in everything that they do. And I think in that way, because I will be honest, everything, even the book she gave me said a quiet strength. And I'm thinking, yes, of course, when she's in her late 70s, she's not going to be as fiery as what she probably was at 20, 30, and 40. But I realized when I started reading that book that a quiet strength, it wasn't that she wasn't very loud. It was that she understood her importance and what her role was in leaving her legacy. So with that, she chose a different approach. And I thought, wow, I mean, this woman is indeed a superhero, because she realized that if she wanted her voice heard, she had to do it a different way.
And you can't do that unless you walk your talk. You're a person of integrity. You're a person of character. I don't think that quiet approach works unless people recognize who you are and the wisdom and insight you bring. And I think Rosa Parks, her life demonstrates and led her to the point where she could do that. Let's talk about Rosa Parks as a team player. You said, I think when we near the beginning of our conversation, you said something about how she was part of something bigger and was a member of a team and contributed in ways that in some ways we saw what she did, and in other times we probably didn't see what she did. She was sort of a behind the scenes person. What's the importance of being a good team player when you're involved with something as big as the civil rights movement?
That is such a wonderful question. And I really think in Rosa Parks' whole entire role of the civil rights movement, she knew what her strengths were. And one of the interesting stories is that there's been so many wonderful biographies on her. And I've worked with one who I absolutely love, is Dr. Jean Theo Harris. But I actually heard I heard another person talk about, because he actually was able to sit with her during his research. And he wanted to know, when you first heard Martin Luther King, you must have been, in awe, because we are all in awe of Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, he still has the number one, and when they rank speeches, I Have a Dream is still the number one ranked speech. So, I mean, we are all in awe of Dr. Martin Luther King, and she was too. And so, Dr. Martin Luther King was really young. I mean, Rosa Parks was already in her 40s. Dr. King was a recent graduate. He graduated young, so he's in his 20s. He's looking quite spiffy, as they used to say back then. And so this biographer asked him, yes, when you first heard Dr. Martin Luther King, you probably thought, wow, he's a great leader. And she said, well, yes, but what we all thought at the time was, oh my goodness, he's a good looking man. And I love that story because it shows the human part of who Rosa Parks was. But she was a person that, she could look at that surface level, but then she looked into what this man could be. And in that instance, you see how a Rosa Parks can look at a young person, hear them, and think, all the ladies are probably fanning, using their, church programs to fan. But then they're realizing this man has so many wonderful qualities, leadership qualities, that for her to just take her role, because she was secretary, and she kept that role and moved that in help with the Montgomery Improvement Association, who really spearheaded the Montgomery bus boycott, to use all of her skills that way. It shows you a human side of Rosa Parks, but it also shows you how she's not afraid to move behind a man who is at the time 20 years younger than her, because she sees that there's a greater mission there.
I think that's an important theme we're pulling out of our conversation today, Angela, the importance of recognizing the potential that exists in the generation that follows us. And in Rosa Parks' case, she saw that in someone who turned out to be a leader that changed the world, but there was something there, and I'm sure she invested in other people that we don't know their names. They're not in our history books, but it sounds like a leader invests in others and recognizes potential. That's a characteristic of leadership I don't know that we talk about enough.
And I think we do. And that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier. Doing this documentary, it was professionally a good move, but personally in my life, there were two big things that I wanted to make sure, is that my son is able to always be able to look at his legacy. But as a person that was, I was in my 40s at the time. I wasn't at a place I wanted to be in my life. And to be able to do this documentary to show how much Rosa Parks poured into young people and to see them in action today, it showed me the importance of the type of leader that I want to work for. And in the case, if I ever become a leader, the type of leader I want to be is that your leaders, the best leaders are people that can see be beyond the surface, like a Rosa Parks did. And that's why I told you that story, beyond the surface of people and see their potential and pour into them. And I think that's so important. And that's one of the things I wanted to do, Dr. Mike, when I wrote that children's book, was for children to see how that relationship, with a person that had all of this knowledge, but taking those leadership skills, pouring them into others, how young people right now, that's why at the end of this book, I give them 3 things that they can do so that they could start being leaders today and start pouring into others today. Because I think that's what makes a strong leader, is that you see these qualities, you pour into them. But I also think it's part of a legacy that Cousin Rosie left, is that we're only as strong leaders as we are when we're pouring into others to make their leap so they can continue the legacy.
Ultimately, leadership is a relationship. And your children's book is about the relationship that Rosa Parks had with her young cousin. And so, we think about relating to other adults in the workplace, relating to our manager, our boss, networking, reaching out to other people that might influence our career success. But it sounds like Rosa Parks made some investments in relationship that really probably would never benefit her, but it was benefiting others in great ways. And that's kind of the big idea I'm taking away from our conversation today. We need to, if we are going to be truly great, we need to take the time to invest in others. Even if there's nothing immediately in it for us, we're building a legacy, creating a legacy for those that follow, and that's going to make an impact on the world that's going to continue on long after we're gone. And that's the case with Rosa Parks. Angela, I always like to invite my guests to give us 1 or 2 actionable ideas, some advice, and maybe your advice is sort of the advice that Miss Parks would give us if she were here. What can we start doing now that will make us better leaders, make us team players, something that we can begin applying later today, tomorrow, next week, that will make us better?
Wow. Okay. And that's wonderful too, because, this is a new year and we have the opportunity to do so many great things in this year. And a lot of people have felt stuck. And so one of the things I've learned is during this whole process is what we can do is when we have our next conversation, we could start practicing our listening skills to really hear what that person's saying. And in hearing what that person's saying, that's where the encouragement comes in. Because what I saw, and that's why we talk about Rosa Parks today, and I was able to even give a different side of Rosa Parks. But Rosa Parks' legacy is because she listened to hear, and when she heard what she wanted to, she poured into that person. And there's no harm in that. And I think a lot of times, especially now, a lot of people feel depleted. They don't know where they're going. But I think Rosa Parks' greatest strength is she faced so much adversity, but her greatest strength was even when she faced all of her adversity, she was still pouring into others. And I bet you that's what fueled her to move forward. And so it could be a fuel for us to move forward. But then also too, I firmly believe that there's so many ways right now that we can continue her activism. And there's a speech that I wrote that it's about Rosa Parks. It's called "Activism Never Sleeps," and I think we have to remain vigilant as activists, and we can do that in so many ways. I mean, Rosa Parks did this, when it came to race relations, but there's so many other ways to do that too, especially now. When we think about activists, we think about how we can pour into others so they can be their best selves. What can we do? And it can be big. I mean, as big as your mind can make it, because I know when I had the ability to talk to, or I said ability, but when I had the recent, I wanted to say, and then of course I'm getting, my brain is fried right now, but when I had the opportunity to talk to Jack Canfield, he said something that made me think of Rosa Parks, because he said, if you have the ability to think it, you have the ability to do it. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is Jack Canfield in saying exactly what a Rosa Parks did her entire life. And so I think people can do that. If you're thinking it, you have the ability to do it, and you should move forward with that. And I think that's one of the two things that I take away from everything that I've done in the research of Rosa Parks, because by making that one choice to do her documentary, I've been able to do so many more incredible things. And it's all because this woman took the time to pour into others, even when she faced adversity.
Amen. Dream big, do big, and invest in other people. That's a great message. Angela, how can people, I hope their interest is piqued right now. If they haven't seen your award-winning documentary, how can they do that? Where do they get the children's book that every little one should have? And what's new? I mean, you've got some new stuff going on. You just mentioned Jack Canfield and a new documentary that I think just premiered. Tell people how to see your work, read your work, connect with you.
Oh, thank you so much for this opportunity. I think the best way to find out everything that I'm doing, because everything is right there on the website, go to my website, drangelasadlerwilliamson.com. You can click right there. It'll take you straight to ordering the children's book. There's a calendar there that talks about all my upcoming activities, where if you're free, you can join those activities. It also, there was a countdown to when the latest documentary is Authentic Conversations, Deep Talk with the Masters. There was a countdown. Now that that's aired, I'm going to be putting the trailer on there. Everything is there, how to connect with me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I think everything's at your fingertips. Definitely go to my website, drangelasadlerwilliamson.com. You can see everything you ever wanted right there on that website. But also, too, there's a way to reach out to me through that website as well. So you can shoot me an email through the Contact Us page. And if you have any questions for me, or would like me to even tell you about, because believe this or not, Dr. Mike, I have not been able to do any in-person book signings because we're in a pandemic. And so this year I'll be starting to do a lot of those in-person book signings for my children's book, and would love to meet people in person when it's safe to do so. But that everything you ever wanted is right there on that website.
That's great. And I'll have all of those links in the show notes. I would encourage you to reach out and connect with Dr. Angela Sadler Williamson. Angela, thank you so much for being my guest on the Mission First People Always podcast and helping us learn leadership lessons from the life of the great Rosa Parks. Until next time, think about what you can do to make a difference in the lives of others, and join us for the next episode of the Mission First People Always Great Leaders, Great Teams podcast.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a stronger, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.